Hi, everyone. I'm Mike Murphy. I'm the transformation editor at Protocol, a new publication that covers the people, power, and politics of tech. Today, I am joined by Alex Wilhelm, Marianne Acevedo, and Jason Rowley. We're going to be talking about how tech journalists like us determine what startups get on their radar and how we think about the ones that we cover and when. I'm going to let each of the panelists introduce themselves. I want to hear a little bit of who you are and what you do. But I'm also going to give you an assignment right off the bat. I want each of you to tell me your best example of a cold call or a pitch that actually worked on you. Alex, I'm going to start with you.
Okay, fair enough. My name is Alex. I'm a reporter over at TechCrunch. I have worked with or known most of these people, so it's good to be here with some old friends. I mostly cover later stage startups, the IPO world, kind of that middle bit between startups and public stocks, if you will. And on the cold pitch front, the stuff that works best on me is stuff that kind of fits into thematically where I'm going. So one thing that I spend a lot of time working on is how fast startups are actually growing. And so occasionally a very interesting company will email or call me and say, hey, would you like to see our recent numbers? And I'm like, I would. Very much so. So there was no prep for that. There was nothing that I was doing to engender that response. They just happened to offer me stuff on a silver platter that I would have loved to have been leaked. And so in those cases, cold pitches work out really, really well. So if you're a big company, tell me how fast you're growing, and I will probably write about it.
That's awesome. Marianne, you're up.
Hi, so I'm managing editor at FinLedger. It's a new fintech-focused publication, and we're focused on B2B fintech. So when it comes to cold pitches, it really helps if the person pitching understands what our focus is and can really narrow in on something very specific. So if you can tell me something really cool or innovative your company is doing, like very specifically, it's going to catch my eye. If you're a founder writing and telling me about your company and why you started it and how it's like going to disrupt everything, that's going to catch my attention. What doesn't catch my attention, even though I don't think you asked this, Mike, is hey, can we just talk on the phone for about 30 minutes and you can tell me what you're working on? Because I don't mean to be rude, but I really don't have time for that. So I really appreciate when people do their homework and then they can come to me with things that they think will be relevant for our audience.
Yeah, I feel you. We'll definitely get into a bit of that. Jason, last but not least.
Sweet. Hey, everybody. I am a researcher at a San Francisco-based company called Golden. So I guess not technically a journalist anymore, so I don't really have to deal with pitches, which is quite nice. But back when I was a journalist, I always enjoyed pitches that described like weird, like companies that were working on like weird futuristic, something that would come out of like a sci-fi book. So yeah. Anything like weirder, spooky, like I'm all over that.
I know that feeling. I definitely like the things that feel like they're out of the norm. Like, everybody wants to disrupt everything, but if you actually have something that seems novel, I mean, that's fun. That's part of why we do this.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah.
You said you're the transformation editor, right?
I am.
Sorry, I can't let that go any longer than this. What is a transformation editor? I don't know what that means.
Well, I think I'm the only one because we totally came up with this title on the fly when I joined Protocol. But basically, I cover it's a broad mandate of any industry, any company that is disrupting the status quo. And I've done a lot so far across like a bunch of different industries. Because those are always my favorite stories to write at Quartz back when I was the tech editor there. The things that are as I said, like things that are actually making a difference, actually changing how things are, I think is supremely interesting to the way we live. And like even like what we're doing right now, this is something that would not have been the norm a year ago, and obviously we've got to do it now. But like those sorts of storylines are a lot of things I'm covering these days.
Cool.
Yeah, I know it's a very grandiose title. It looks good on a business card.
Yeah, exactly.
But all right, so I guess the first thing I want to talk about before we get into like specifics is a kind of high level, what the value of journalism is to founders and startups. Why do this? And Jason, I know when we were talking before, you had some thoughts on this, so I want to start with you.
Sure. So it's funny, I was on the other side of the table for announcing Golden's Series A round. I helped write our press release and do some of the outreach around that. And so, yeah, it's this is a subject near and dear to my heart as of late. I think like for founders, there's like two primary utilities to making announcing a funding round, to getting press coverage, and primarily it has to do with like partly it's the ability to like see your name in print or on a screen, and that's always kind of nice. But more than that, it's an opportunity to say that hey, we're growing, we're hiring, and then it's also a trigger for many folks to reach out for potential sales or other types of commercial opportunities.
So it's kind of like a combination of getting your name out there and making sure that others in the industry know about you. Yep. Alex, what do you think?
Well, I think everything Jason said is totally right, but I would throw in that I think there's another use for these kind of announcements as well, which is that if you read a lot of early stage funding rounds, you get a pretty good feel for who's actually raising money inside the last couple of months, which is a really useful signal. And so one reason why I still cover funding rounds, even though, I mean, as we all know, they're not the most popular thing that we write. They're relatively hard. They're hard to put together. Often the company's hard to understand. It can be a pretty big lift for not an enormous amount of like traffic or other publishing metrics. But what I find out is that I learn a lot about what's actually happening. And so I think for other founders out there reading a lot of these, you'll start to notice patterns, trends, who's actually writing checks, who's taking board seats, how people are talking about different things, what are they beginning to focus on more, where are the pivots happening. And there's a lot of information in these that provides a fractional view of the market. But if you put enough of those together, you get a better picture. And so to me, there's small windows into what's going on the ground. And I think founders, because they're often siloed in their company, just really heads down, can use these as kind of a periscope to look up and kind of, poke around a little bit and see what's happening. And I mean, that's why I do them. So I'm less stupid. And I'm sure that applies to more people than just myself.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Marianne, do you have thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, our publication might be a little bit different because we focus on startups, but we also focus on incumbents in the fintech space. So the value that getting published, I think, on FinLedger would be not only getting publicity, but there are a lot of incumbents, people from big banks and major financial institutions that subscribe to our newsletter. So you're on their radar when you get a story written about you. So yeah, it's beyond just a, hey, we're here, we exist, but you're also opening yourself up to potential partners, potential acquirers, maybe one day, potential investors. So there's a lot of value, I think, for the companies that do pitch to us.
Mike, can I add something to that?
Yeah.
Yeah, so great point, Marianne, about the incumbents in you. Also, I think that when you're covering a startup outside of a funding context, which happens pretty often, investors do notice that. And I always forget this fact, but I did a piece looking at how fast a bunch of startups grew in Q3 because I was just curious. I just asked people, email me your Q3 metrics, and people did, which is cool. And I just wrote up like 20 of them, just here's who did what. And it was kind of a fun little idea. It wasn't that big of a deal, but it was neat. And one of the smallest entries, the guy emailed me and said, hey, I've had a number of like top tier VCs reach out to me after I was in your story. And I'm like, really? That? Huh? And so people really do read the stuff that startups want to reach. They're not always the most popular stories, but they seem to reach the right audience. And so that's, I think, the kind of like value that we bring towards these younger companies.
I think that's really part of it is there's a reason that we in the media have our silos. Like, we're trying to hit those audiences, and if we succeed, those audiences are going to get value out of them. So that, I totally see that, and that kind of actually drives me to my next question, which is, especially on the younger side of things for newer startups, what really draws you all to a startup? What do you look for? Are there things that your publication generally looks for? Marianne, obviously you're only going to be covering the world of fintech. So if someone pitches you a new cooler or something, it probably doesn't make a lot of sense. But more generally, are there things that draw you all to startups? Marianne, I'll start with you.
Yeah, like I said, I'm drawn to really cool origin stories. I like hearing what prompted or what got a founder excited about an idea. And one of the things I've heard lately, it's that very often the really neat companies are not started by people who are like in the industry already. There are people who personally encountered a problem in their lives and were like, okay, this sucks, it needs to be fixed, and then they set about trying to fix it. So those kinds of stories really interest me. I'm always curious as to the people behind the companies and what drew them to founding a company and the idea and how they built it. So that's kind of a big thing for me.
No, that totally makes sense. And there definitely have been cases where I've heard a founder's story and I've been like, not on the fence, let's say, about the company, and then I'll hear why they got into it, and I'll be like, oh my God, this so dramatically affected your life, and now I understand what you and obviously probably lots of other people are going through, that now I must write about it.
Yep. Right. Exactly. You get it. Mm-hmm.
Alex, how about you?
The number one thing that I think I look for is growth, because a startup fundamentally is a money-losing entity that is on borrowed time, usually someone else's money, trying to grow as fast as they can. And so the rules don't apply, because we often think about companies through the lens of profitability or dividends at the larger scale. Startups are designed to lose money but grow quickly. And so to me, the number one thing that I care about is growth. I mean, for example, this morning I wrote about Hopin, which just raised $125 million after it raised $40 million, after it raised $6.8 million all this year, and grew from 0 to 20 million ARR. Wow. Now, do I really care about online event software? No, I don't.
Well, we're using it right now.
Yeah. I know. I told the CEO that last night. I'm like, actually, ironically, tomorrow morning I'm on a panel and we're using Hopin. He was like, cool, thanks. No, but like, I don't really care. I don't get up in the morning and go, ooh, software about events. Yes, virtual versus hybrid events. But the growth story draws me in, because I know this company is really hitting the right note in the market today to build real resonance and expand to become maybe a public company. So that grabs my attention. And then because I'm also a human, I pattern match. And so if I start reading a bunch of stuff about, low code startups or startups delivering their products via an API or a big boom in insurtech funding or whatever it is, I try to pay attention to trends and then look out for companies that fit inside of those different things. And so I'll pay a little bit more attention to stuff that to me is part of a thematic grouping, which may be a weakness in my reporting, but it's how I view the world, because I can't know everything. I only know this little bit. So
yeah. And I think what's interesting about this as well is the dichotomy here between you and Marianne is like, there's more than one way to approach a story. And for startups out there, it's important to know who you're pitching and the publication you're pitching and what that person might be looking for. If someone comes to you with a beautiful story of discovery that led them to a startup and won't tell you anything about growth, probably not the story for you. Versus Marianne might be more interested in the history of the company and the people. So it's just something to keep in mind. Jason, I don't know if you have any additional thoughts there.
So for me, it's all about what's the innovation, right? And it doesn't have to be like, ooh, we're commercializing like cold fusion technology or whatever, right? It can sometimes just be like a new take on how to present media, right? Like, way back in the day, like Snapchat was like incredibly innovative because of the ephemerality component, right? And so being able to say like, okay, well, what is the thing that is done differently here? And then say, well, then what is the implications of that, thing going forward is to me where I think things get really interesting. But yeah, apart from all that, I also just want to echo what Alex and Marianne said earlier as well.
That makes a lot of sense.
Could I add one quick thing to that, Mike? So even though I'm truly fascinated by cool origin stories, I have to say I also get really excited about companies that are profitable, because I feel like it's so rare in the startup world. So when I get an email and someone's telling me, yeah, we're profitable, then my ears perk up, because those of us who've been covering startups for a while, we're so used to companies burning cash, and then like being so deeply unprofitable. So that's always a really big thing that catches my attention too.
Also, the fun thing there is then you get to ask them, how do you define profitability? And you can hear them mumble distinctly in the back of the phone, trying to figure out how to possibly spin this. Well, it's non-GAAP billings on a forward 12-month basis compared to, but yeah, that's a fun conversation. I also totally agree, Marianne. Whenever I see that and growth, I'm just like, impressive. Because that company is going to be huge, because Apple, Microsoft, Facebook, and Google were all super profitable, super early, because they'd really found something that would change the market. And that's why they're worth $1 trillion today. So those companies are the actual unicorns of the startup world.
Yeah. And I don't want to belabor this topic, but just to say, like, I'm usually more impressed by like a lean and mean team that's like, making money or at least generating some decent revenue than one that's like raised hundreds of millions of dollars but has like very little traction. Just
who are we subtweeting?
Hmm?
Who are we making fun of?
Several companies.
Several companies.
So I want to switch gears a little bit. Oh, and one thing I should mention, by the way, for everyone listening, if you have questions, please drop them in the chat. We'll get to ones if there's stuff there that makes adds to the conversation. But one thing I was wondering is, speaking of conversations, how do you guys feel about kind of running relationships with founders or people at startups? How transactional do you view things? I personally feel like there are certain founders that I want to talk to them about stories in their industry, even if it has nothing to do with them, even if I'm not going to write anything. It's like, this person knows what they're talking about. I want to know their take because it makes me smarter, and then I don't say dumb things on the internet, which is kind of what I strive for. And then there are companies that either they don't want to talk, or they're just, it's just not the same kind of, everyone's different. People glom onto different things about different people. But, is that something you all do? I don't know if is that just me? Alex, let's start with you.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I would say, generally speaking, the more open and accessible a person or company is, the greater the chances that they're going to get covered. Mm-hmm. Now, that doesn't mean you have to be my friend. In fact, I already have like 6 friends, and that's enough. I'm maxed. I can't really have any more. And so I'm not out there looking for like new besties, but I do find that the people who are willing to jump on the phone to kibitz, to talk about either what they're doing, the market, or something else that I'm trying to dig into, are the people to whom I tend to listen to more when they reach out, and also the people to whom I pay the most attention. And they seem to be the most interesting people in general. The people that don't want to talk tend to be less interesting when you actually get them on the phone. I don't know if that's media training or just their personality, but on the transactional basis, it's always a little bit sticky to know people in the industry you cover. I think we all deal with that. I try to keep my personal and professional lives pretty distinct as best as I can, because I don't like owing people things. So I don't want to owe anybody anything at any point in time. I want to only cover the stuff that's best and will help educate my readers the most. And I try to do as good of a job at that as I can. I'm not perfect, to be clear. That's my thought on that.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, we're all humans, and there's definitely interests that I've shared with people, and it's like, yeah, I'm gonna bug you about this new album that came out that I know this band we both like.
I mean,
there's only so many people that like the same weird music I like. I mean, I gotta find them where I find them.
Yeah, like Hunter Walk from Homebrew Ventures. He's also a heavy metal fan, and so we've been to some concerts together. But it's not like I'm going to be like, Hunter, we went to a show together, you need to leak me your shit. He'd be like, no, I'm not going to do that. And also, delete my number. So,
or the opposite of like, we went to the show, please write about my company that I just funded. Like,
gross.
Yeah, that would be. Oh, I would be a little much. Jason, much. Do you feel the same way? Is this how you things were for you when this was your day to day?
Yeah, in general, yes. I think like in terms of ongoing relationships, something that a lot of folks don't spend a lot of time talking about is relationships with folks in like the PR business. So like there's lots of people who, on the PR side who send interesting stuff, and I maintained at least pretty close relationships with those folks to just say like, hey, what are you guys hearing about? And of course, I wouldn't write about even 10% of whatever they sent, but it's still like a way for people to to have that sort of like narrative deal flow that comes in, right? Is being able to have those relationships and keep those going.
I see. Marion, any thoughts?
I mean, I would agree with all that Alex and Jason said, and I do think that when a founder makes themselves accessible, it definitely makes for a better story. No offense to comms folks or anything like that, but if you're writing about a pretty significant news event and the founder's not accessible, it's kind of a turnoff. And it's a turnoff, I think, not just for journalists but for the readers, and so it's actually really doing themselves a disservice, in my opinion, unless there's just like some emergency or whatever the case may be. But In general, yeah, I don't really view these relationships as transactional at all. If I have a founder that I have a relationship with, and they may tell me about news that, oh, okay, it's interesting. I wouldn't really cover this, but good to know. Thanks. It doesn't hurt to have the back and forth, but that doesn't necessarily mean, just because we have a pretty decent relationship, it's not going to necessarily change like judgment in terms of whether I would cover something or not.
Yeah. I think that makes sense. I feel like there's, as you say, there's like different reasons why a founder might not be available or whatever the case may be. But for the reader, I feel like if I'm writing about something important about the company and I can't talk to the company, then as a reader, I'd be like, what's going on here? That would be my first thought. But that actually, again, draws me to my next question, which is, I know that we've said that we want the founder to be available, but do you think that you respond better to pitches from people whose job it is to communicate, which is usually PR people, and they can get the message across, or from the founders themselves? Alex, start with you.
It's a great question. Generally speaking, founders, because the founders that are going to take the time to follow the media world are going to be the ones that are the best to talk to because they're a little bit plugged in. For example, I'm trying to come up with the company's name now. Ramp, I think it's Ramp. They compete with Brex. I think I've only really corresponded with the CEO, and it's a way to allow us to almost like without chaperones chat. And I know that there are certain industries, there's regulation and there's stuff that makes that a little bit harder. But generally speaking, being able to kibitz with someone is going to be the way you learn the most and also get as much as you can out, which is really how I can write something that's better and more rich and interesting. And then people will read it more. This isn't a bad thing to be open. It's actually net good. Nothing bad happens if you're a bit more open. No one jumps into your industry because, oh, they're 10% bigger than I thought. Oh God, now we have to go do that. It's not really how it goes. I think there's too much focus on secrecy in the startup world and not enough focus on I would say chest beating. But founders that are good at PR are like knives through my inbox. They just slice through everything, and I open those first. So if you have a charismatic CEO, I would leverage that because, like you said, we're all human. And it's nice to not have to go through multiple layers of internal and then external comms, and then who's on this calendar. And if there's 7 people, and you're like, is it 8 people coming to this meeting? It's that gets to be a bit onerous.
True, but at the same time, and maybe this is a follow-up question for everyone, is like, at what point are you getting PR people? Because you, at the end of the day, have a job, and your job isn't to talk to the media 24/7. That's why you have a comms team. How early on in the process do you think that, I've heard, I used to work in startups years ago, and they always said that the last job you hire is the marketing person because you want the product to work first. But eventually you do need to hire one if you want people to know about it. You want to talk to the media, get people to know about it. So, at what point in the process is that before or after you've got something that's worth selling? Do you sell on the hope that the product will be ready to go by the time it's out there, or do you do the right thing and wait and then sell? Jason, what do you think?
So I'm not going to answer that question directly, but what I will say is that like hiring, like having a PR person to like shepherd you through the process of like interacting with media can be helpful, but like the real utility I think doesn't come from like listening to like how to package a narrative or like how to phrase things in particular ways or whatever. It really comes from like just having a person there, usually probably as like a consultant in a consulting capacity, there to be the sort of like showrunner to say like, okay, you have an interview with such and such person at such time, and you have to get this press release out to such and such person. This guy asked for a statement. That person asked for this. Having somebody there, I think, can be really helpful because like running a company and building a product and selling stuff and trying to make money is hard enough as it is. But in general, like apart from that sort of like that operational assistance component, I think that a lot of founders would do better or a lot of founding teams would do better to do a lot of that outreach themselves, especially at early stage.
Yeah, I see. Maren, what do you think?
Yeah, I would agree with all of that. I mean, there was a pitch I got last week from a founder. An announcement had gone out just that day, and my first inclination was to say, sorry, this is old. You should have come to me before on an embargoed basis. But then I was intrigued when I looked up the name, and the company was very interesting. And I realized it was the founder reaching out to me, and it kind of changed things. It wasn't just, a PR person saying, hey, here's the press release. So I would agree with Alex that there is some real value in founders reaching out directly to journalists. But at the same time, I would also agree with Jason that it may be a great first contact, but ultimately, especially as you continue to grow, it probably does make sense to have someone there to help with strategy and coordination. But yeah, those initial emails from founders are always welcome.
One way this happened to me recently, I have a call coming up with the CEO of I don't know, we'll call them a unicorn fintech company. There you go. And because I don't know what's in the meeting yet, so I don't want to talk about it. The CEO emailed me, and I said, oh yeah, let's do that. And then he tagged in his assistant, and then she talked to me, and we figured out a time.
Right.
Great.
Yeah, that's the way to do it.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's perfect.
I know his name. We've had lunch, but I don't know everyone who works at his company in the comms department. So when scrolling down through the emails, I'm not going to notice other people's names as much as that person's name.
Yeah.
So that's a way to actually just grab my eyeballs and say, look at this, read this now.
Right.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, the worst is when you have a relationship with a founder or someone at a company, and then their external comms person whose job it is to blanket pitch everyone in the industry pitches you, and you're like, I wrote about this 3 weeks ago. What's going on?
Exactly. Yeah. It makes me feel, I don't know if it's a journalist thing or what, but maybe we're just, I don't know, maybe it's just me that's a little sensitive, but it's like, oh, come on, we have this relationship. What is this?
Yeah. It does feel weird. There's an interesting conversation happening in the chat that I wanted to bring up about representation in the media, and how much of our job it is to not perpetuate the homogeneity that there has been in the industry to date. I mean, there are 3 white guys on this panel right now. I think that kind of hints at the problem here. And I don't know what the right way to think about this is, but what sorts of ways, Alex, I'll start with you as a fellow white man that is, this is a tough thing, is how much do you feel that by covering certain companies, you are perpetuating, tropes that have existed before that might not necessarily be the best thing, or the most representative of what's actually happening in the industry today, how tech is changing?
So a couple of thoughts about that, kind of answering around it, and you can tell me if I get close enough to the mark. One thing I think we've all discovered in the last couple of years, if you're a little bit late to this, like I was that the journalism industry itself is pretty non-diverse in a way it's shocking, because it doesn't really represent the people that are being covered in the national media. The tech media is probably a little bit worse, I think, than average. So one thing that I have been trying to do is to diversify whom I talk to, my source list, effectively, people that I reach out to. So I'm working on a story actually right after this. I was typing it before, and I'll be typing on it afterwards. And I reached out to a bunch of VCs for a particular question, and I made sure to ask, I think 80% women, because that's one way that I can, through my coverage, not just do my job, but do it a little bit better by reaching out to people and trying to get a more diverse set of voices into the mix. I can't change who I am or what I do, but I can certainly use my position as a way to help change the ratios of the conversation a little bit, which I think is a meaningful step. And the other thing I throw in there is that, I'm really lucky to work for a publication that cares about this. TC does a lot of coverage on what we kind of put under the justice banner. We do a lot of coverage of labor relations. We do a lot of coverage of diversity. We do a lot of coverage of female founders. And so we really care about this sort of thing. And we're actually doing a push as a publication to do a lot more questions to companies that we cover about their current diversity metrics, how they think about that, and that sort of thing. And so we're active in this, and we're trying to build a diverse team, and we're trying to cover a diverse industry and make sure that we talk to a diverse set of sources. And so are we good? No. Are we doing better? Yes. And we're going to keep doing better. And so that's encouraging to me, and it makes it a much more exciting place to work.
I like that. I mean, it's something I know we at Protocol are trying to do the same thing, and something we instituted recently was to be able to audit our sources. Not just thinking proactively about who to reach out to, but going back and Monday morning quarterbacking what we did. And it's like, well, why didn't we talk to people of color or women or non-binary people for this if we could have? And sometimes it's, there's a crunch and you have 8 hours to turn around a feature. And sometimes you're just fall into bad tropes. But as you say, I feel like we're at least acknowledging this is way better than I feel like it was even recently. I don't know. Marianne, do you have thoughts?
I do have a lot of thoughts. I mean, at Crunchbase News, we made a real effort, and I think we did a pretty decent job of representation in terms of the founders we covered, and not just founders, but even investors. Like we did a feature on Latina VCs that I thought was really cool. And I mean, the diversity is there. You just, you have to be open to it. You have to maybe sometimes poke around to uncover it, but it's absolutely there. And I think that, I think I had talked to a founder recently who was Mexican American. Well, I mentioned that in my editor's note that he was Mexican American, and maybe that wasn't so relevant to the startup story, but you know what? He had a really neat background, and I thought it was cool to bring it up. So when you have an opportunity to bring up heritage, why not? I think that's little things like that can help show how diverse the startup world is, and people may not even realize it. We've done stories on immigrant founders or companies or founders who hail from different countries, and sometimes I'll just mention that so-and-so who was born and raised in this country, things like that. At FinLedger, we're starting a Women in FinTech series and to focus on women. We did a story recently about a number of new banks and financial institutions that were targeted toward the Black and Latinx communities. And so anyway, I think that there's ample opportunity to diversify our coverage, and it may not happen with breaking news. And I don't think that's necessarily always so realistic, as you pointed out, Mike, but in terms of features or even just other types of news, if you have an opportunity to bring up where a person came from or their heritage and it's not totally out of place, then why not? Why not highlight the diversity?
Well, there was an interesting follow-up here in the chat to this conversation about how by intrinsically covering white founders who do tend to get funded more at every level than people of color and women, are we, the journalists, perpetuating this problem? And it's tough because on the one hand, you want to cover what has happened, but how hard is it how much do we have to question, what we are adding to the existing problem by only going with what has happened? Yeah, I don't know if that makes sense, but like if the problem is that this is happening and we cover that it's happening, and then we have a separate story that says that this is probably not the best thing, but in the day-to-day, we're still just covering that another 21-year-old white guy from Stanford got $1 billion. Are we perpetuating the problem? I don't know. That's a tough one.
I would just say that you can't not cover interesting rounds or cool companies, but you have to balance it. You have to balance that coverage. So if you get a pitch about a cool company that was started by this really smart Black man and it just raised all this money, you just consider that coverage just as you would, as the Stanford grad, and give it, as much justice and time and everything else. So I think to me, it's about balance. So, and honestly, it's not even something I feel like is super conscious. I mean, if I get a pitch and it's a cool company and it happens to have been founded by a Black person, okay, awesome. I'm not necessarily, I don't feel like, oh, I have to cover this to show that I'm being diverse. I mean, I'm just like, oh, even better, it's a Black founder we get to highlight, you know what I mean? But I really think at the end of the day, it goes down to just being balanced. Alex and Jason, what do you think?
One thing that I've been trying to do is to look in more places. And so I think you're right, Marianne. if Airbnb raised $2 billion today, I have to write about that. I cannot not do that. And yes, it was founded by some white dudes, probably from Stanford. But like, that doesn't mean that in the rest of my time, I can't go out hunting a bit more. And so one thing that I've tried to do this year is I talked to a guy named James Norman from Pilotly. He's building a really cool software solution to do kind of like the television pilot response groups. And also he's putting together a lot of information on Black founders with the Black founder list and going through which VCs have invested in Black founders and so forth. And I've written about this a couple of times because I think it's a cool data project, but also brings a lot of light to the founders that are not getting as much attention. And so it's a cool way to kind of open the funnel a bit into our world to let more people see who out there is building stuff. And then the other thing I throw in there is geography. I used to live in Invesco. I lived there for 8 years, and where you live does impact who you meet and where you go and where you talk to. I ended up in South Park and Soma a lot, and there's like it's essentially mayonnaise on white bread. It's the whitest shit you've ever seen. But now I'm not in the Bay Area anymore, and so I don't have quite as much geographical focus, and so I am looking a bit more around. I'm trying to cover startups in Africa more. We just saw a big deal with Stripe buying a African fintech company for several $100 million. I hadn't heard of it. That's my bad. I should have known that company. I should have been paying more attention to the Nigerian startup scene. So you need to raise your perspective a little bit, look around more, but we can't not cover big things like Plaid getting sued by the DOJ over the Visa deal. Yes, it was founded by a white dude, but I can't not cover that. It's the biggest story in fintech this month. It's my responsibility to do the hard work, but also to cover the big things. And again, am I doing good? No. Am I doing better? Yes. And I'm going to try to keep upping my own game to have a better coverage perspective.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to think about it. Jason, do you have any extra thoughts?
No, I don't think I can add on to any of the fantastic points that have already been made.
I think that I'm glad that we went this way because it's a tougher thing than just like, how do you talk to a tech journalist about your company? I mean, that's hard in and of itself, and it's not to belittle the work that any founder does because I definitely don't want to do it. I've worked at journalism startups; it's hard enough. But it's just such a tough thing. And I guess I'm going to lighten the mood a little bit here with a simpler question. Are there any PR people or founders that you wouldn't work with? And I don't want you to name names unless someone is truly horrible and the world must know, but I don't think that's the case. But more just like types of people, types of founders or types of, comms people that just rub you the wrong way. And I've got to believe we all have our types. Jason, I'll start with you.
Oh my gosh. So it's a fact universally acknowledged, at least on the old Crunchbase news team, that I hate email. And people who constantly send like those like, ooh, just like raising this up to the top of your inbox, like follow-up type emails, like multiple times. I'm like, buddy, I don't know what I need to do apart from like, I don't know, do I have to send like a postcard to your office to say like, please do not email me, remove me from your list, please. It just being constantly pinged by, like, ooh, did you see this stuff? It really bugs me. But that's just my own sort of like personal biases there.
No, I feel that way too. There's a term in New York, you call it the New York no, when you just don't respond.
Oh, nice.
That's amazing.
When you get like 7 responses from someone who's just following up into the void, it's like, you're not from New York.
That's amazing.
Alex, what about you? Is there any types of people that really rub you the wrong way?
Well, I won't cover founders that have a history of abuse.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So like Mike Cagney, I think from formerly of SoFi, I think maybe. Anyways, he keeps cropping up in my inbox and people are trying to tell me what he's doing and I don't care.
Yeah.
I'm not going to care. I maybe someone out there can write comeback stories for people that have a history of abuse. It's not going to be me. So, spare yourself the time. And people get pretty snippy when you respond with like, so I respond to those emails with like a link to like a New York Times article about the abuse and people don't like that, shockingly enough. I don't, I'm not paid to shill for abusers, so it's not my problem. And then The only type of PR people I don't like, I don't mind people getting my name wrong, really. I don't mind the wrong pitches, really, because mostly what you're seeing is really junior PR people be given shitty assignments from their higher ups. And so I don't want to shit on someone who's 23 and is just doing their job. That's, you know, that's this one off my back. And I'm now mature enough and to let that roll off my back. That's fine. But I don't like people who aggressively presume ownership of my time or attention, because there's a lot that I'm trying to do. Because we're in journalism, we're all doing a couple of jobs at once because our industry is dying from underneath us. And, you know, I don't have enough time as it is. And so I can't do a lot of stuff. It's not personal. It's very rarely personal. But to presume that you get my time in any capacity, Jason's emailing thing, getting lots of calls, whatever it is, going hitting up my friends to try to get my attention, just weird shit. It really rubs me the wrong way. I'm a person, and I'm tired, and I'm doing my best, and so I'll treat you that way if you'll treat me that way.
Yeah, I think that the history part of things is really important. I mean, covering abusers, I don't know what would go through a journalist's head that they would want to do that. But at the same time, there's other things where it's like, I don't know, I just think of people like, you know, who are reinvented in other ways. It's like, you crashed your company by being a jackass. Like there are other problems that often get spackled over. And again, it tends to be white guys that get the redemption story, not to go back to that. But yeah, I totally get that of like, when someone's like, hey, I got this brand new startup for you. This guy you might have heard of. I'm like, yeah, of course I've heard of him. He's an asshole.
Yeah, exactly. Famously mean, terrible to other people, belittles people, got drunk and punched somebody at a tech event. I don't know. Like, it's just, I don't need that. There's enough really great people who are underdogs, who are doing cool things that I would love to give my teeny little spotlight a little bit of time inside of, versus gigantic galactic asshat. Like, I just don't need that.
Yeah, exactly. Mariana, any additional people you can't stand?
Well, of course, I would echo the repetitive follow-ups get extremely annoying. And, you know, I've responded before to people and say, well, I'll review this and get back to you if I'm interested. And then they'll still keep emailing me. And it's like, really, how much more clear do I need to be? If I'm interested, I'm going to get back to you. And you're continuously pestering me is not going to help your chances. So, you know, I understand they have a job to do, but there's, you know, you've got to have some more boundaries there and be respectful of time. Also, I just don't really like dishonesty. I mean, who does? But like, I've had a PR person. Of course, I won't name names, but I wrote about an initiative that their company did or their company, and then like weeks later, they approached one of my coworkers with an exclusive about the exact same thing that I had written about as part of a bigger story. And I didn't realize what was happening until it was like too late. But I thought, I mean, really, how can you do that? Like, that's just wrong. So that kind of thing will put you on my like bad list. I will not forget that. And lastly, I will say, I really don't like I'm going to pitch this as an exclusive to 10 journalists, and whoever grabs it first gets it. Because more than once I've said, oh, yeah, okay, I'm interested. And then the PR person comes back to me and says, oh, well, somebody else responded before you. So sorry, I retract my exclusive. That's another surefire way to really get on our bad side. That leaves a very bad taste in my mouth. So, you know, if you want to give exclusives, maybe say, I'm going to give you until this time to respond.
Yes.
If you don't respond, I'm moving on. I totally respect that. But to do it at the same time as like several other journalists is just not professional, and that's not cool.
Also, exclusives are bad. Yeah. Exclusives are just not a good thing. Don't do that. Like, if your story is interesting, pitch it to people. We'll cover it or we don't. But I hate it when people like try to get me to cover something exclusively, and then to them it's the biggest thing of the month. But to me, it's like, I've got 48 minutes on Tuesday at noon to write about this. Like, don't put your hopes and dreams on me. I don't have time for that. just like let's have a 15-minute call with the CEO. I'll cover it if I think it's interesting, and then leave me alone.
Right.
I like I've had a few PR people recently do like exclusives in different like silos. So I covered something recently that was kind of science adjacent. So it's like I was the only business publication they reached out to, and then they reached out to a science publication, and then I forget what the other one was. But it's like, that makes sense.
Yeah.
You're covering your bases of the people that might be interested in this, as opposed to 10 people in the same industry who are going to write the same story. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah,
just
cool. I like that.
But like, it's fine if you want to do it. As you say, it's like, if it's interesting, people will cover it, and people will cover it even if they weren't part of the embargo, if it's really interesting. And I think that's something worth remembering for a lot of younger startups out there. It's like, if you have an interesting story to tell, and you don't know every journalist out there, and one or two write it, be prepared for an influx of people being like, hey, I want to talk to you because this is interesting. And then next time, maybe you let those people know ahead of time. But I think, as you say, it's like it's kind of like a build it and they will come sort of thing. And I think it's hard to know that until it's happened, obviously. But like, if you have faith in what you're doing and you know that it's not incremental, then you're probably going to be on a pretty strong footing for whatever your story is.
Yeah, the best way to get coverage is to be interesting. I mean, that sounds so stupid, but it's absolutely true. Like, I cover nuances of changes in policy at interesting startups because they're sufficiently important as to grab my mind. Like Robinhood changing how it handles options UI inside of its application, super important to things that I care about. Really minor product change, but like that startup matters. It's changing the world. So of course I'm going to show up and pay a lot of attention. That should be the goal versus like having a slick strategy. Do slick things. Yeah,
I think that's fair. Well, those are pretty much the only questions I had here. This has been awesome. It's been great to talk to you all, and thanks everyone for listening and jumping in some actually really great questions and important comments. Thanks everyone. It's been great.
Can I just end this with one last quick thing? And
sure.
I'll be quiet. Sorry, it's just, at the time I didn't really articulate it well, but another thing that I think that it's important for all founders to remember, let us know what's unique about your company. I think Jason alluded to it earlier about innovation, but like spell it out for me, like tell me why what you do is different from the slew of other startups out there, in this space. That's also going to help a lot and do it quickly, like in a pitch, just get to the point, tell me in like 2 or 3 graphs why what you're doing is cool, why it's different. It goes a long way. You don't even have to send me a 10 paragraph press release. So anyway, I just wanted to emphasize that that's like a really easy way to get attention of a journalist too.
I think that's totally fair. I mean, you have your elevator pitch, use it on us too.
Right.
If it worked for your VCs, it's probably going to work for us.
Yes.
Well, great, everyone. Let's just go around. Everyone, say where they can find you on the internet, and then we'll wrap things up here. Jason, let's start with you.
Sweet. You can find me on Twitter at Jason_Rowley. And you can also subscribe to my increasingly occasional newsletter at rowley.report.
Awesome. Marianne?
The website is finledger.com. I'm on Twitter with the handle Bay Area Writer, even though I haven't lived in the Bay Area for about 9 years. And what else? I think that's about it. Email's easy to find.
Nice. Alex?
I'm Alex on Twitter, and my email is alex.wilhelm@techcrunch.com if you want to shoot me a note. And I'll just say that Marianne's publication, FinLedger, is new, and it's very, very good. So if you hadn't really given it a chance, please go check it out. Same to Protocol with Mike. Really impressive. I love the design. I love the people there. It's really exciting to see new publications formed. And also Jason's newsletter, rally.report, is pretty good. And it's not that frequent, so it won't blow up your inbox. But really, everyone here is lovely, and give them some attention if you have a chance.
Thank you, Alex.
Thank you, Alex.
And I am MCWM on Twitter, and protocol.com. Check it out. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Have a good day.